It's hooking in. Here we go. Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt here with life coach Cindie Chavez. Today is Wednesday. Happy Neville Day, everybody. Wednesday, October the 23rd, 2019. It's 4 p.m. New York time. That's 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. in London, 5 a.m. in Tokyo, and 6 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. But wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that we're back to Neville Day, back to talking about Neville Goddard. I mean, we had that one break a couple weeks ago, Cindie, and it left a gap in my life. So when we got back to it last week, I was happy. It was a good feeling. It was really, really good.
Well, I'm always happy to be here for Neville Day, and happy to hear whatever's transpired since I've been here last, right? Because it's always something good. So.
And we were chatting before the podcast. A lot's been transpiring lately. We right? Both of us independently have been doing, imaginals. We've been doing affirmations and so forth. Specifically, you were doing one that I did for a while, but you picked up on the one that Neville told us about in a story, which is pretty cool. I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah, it's funny. Occasionally, I have trouble sleeping, and I never have trouble falling asleep. Generally speaking, I fall asleep in like 2 seconds, but sometimes I wake up and then have a hard time going back to sleep. And I always use that time to just create something, right? Like I recognize, okay, I'm not going to get all tangled up about it. Now, when I'm awake 3 hours, then I start getting tangled up about it.
Yeah, understandably. Yeah.
But usually I just start either imagining something or saying a mantra over and over, an affirmation or something until I fall back asleep. And we had read the one story where the woman was in dire straits, had no family, had no support, nothing, and was going to use Neville's teaching and tried to start imagining the things she needed. And she needed so many things that she said, I can't do this. It's just too stressful to imagine this long list of everything I need. And so she just decided that she would go for assuming the feeling of something wonderful. So she started saying, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now. Mm-hmm. And she said it over and over as she was falling asleep. And lo and behold, she receives this giant check in the mail, and out of nowhere,
right?
Someone she hadn't seen in 40 years or something. I think that might have been the story where she not only received the giant check in the mail, but it was like a check every month for the rest of her life or something.
Right.
Ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah.
So not that I'm in any dire strait at all. My life is very good, but I just had kind of challenged our audience, like, let's all do this meditation. And then I promptly forgot it. And I was
we are so wont to do. All of us do that.
And I was gone for the next week. So I come back 2 weeks later and like I remember it that day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't do it once. So after last week, it just kind of came to me. One night I was just falling back asleep and I remembered, and I couldn't remember the exact words. I was like, it starts out with, isn't it wonderful? But I can't really remember it. So I looked it up in the book and I tweaked one little thing because the book says, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now. Mm-hmm. So I changed it to something marvelous is happening for me now.
Oh,
because
nice. I like that.
I like the idea of everything is happening for me, not happening to me. Right?
Yep.
So I just started saying it over and over and I fell asleep. And I did it the next night and the next night. And this week has been one big celebration. Like all kinds of wonderful things, from being really inspired. I don't mean just feeling good. I mean inspirational kind of genius coming through, right? Like ideas and creating things that I'm really proud of. And then, some new clients and some client wins. Like I never work on a Sunday. But this past Sunday, my husband was going to go do a couple of hours of work and I was going to go with him. And then I said, no, you know what? I'm going to go to my office too, because I had a few things that I wanted to get ahead of the, curve on. So it's like, if I go to my office for those 2 hours, I will get so much done. So I'm going to do that. And I came in and I opened my email and I have all these client emails of like celebration, like big wins for my clients. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Like, I'm so happy that who is happy to go into the office on Sunday, but I was happy. And I just realized that this whole week, it's just been one of those weeks where everything's coming up roses, so I'm just going to connect it back to that mantra of, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now. Sometimes I say for us now, because I'm including my husband in there too.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, is it cause and effect? I don't know, but it feels great. I'm very
happy.
I
think it definitely is. I'll actually second it by telling a couple stories of my own, and I'm going to bring in a comment from Nasha. Nasha and Jeffrey have tuned in to the live stream, and Nasha is actually asking us, how do I get into a good place? She's currently in the hospital apparently and dealing with pain. But Nasha, there's no reason why you can't use the same thing. Do it when you're going to sleep. Just start with the idea, and you want to do everything you can to feel it. Yes, we know you're dealing with pain right now, but just do your best anyway to try to feel it anyway. Feel like, yes, this is wonderful. Something marvelous is happening for me now.
I just remembered something that happened, and I did not create this as far as like consciously decide on a script or something. I started dreaming. I just remembered this while I was saying, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now. I started having this dream. This is funny, but in my dream, I had this telephone, and the telephone could call anybody.
Ooh.
People that had passed on, my parents, people that were still alive, people I only know on Facebook, people that are friends in real life. And I was calling everyone and I was saying, isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now.
Oh, wow.
And they would say, I called you too. And you said, that's fantastic. And then I hit the button and called the next person. And I was just calling everyone, and everyone was celebrating with me.
Fabulous. I love that. That is great. Boy, you just took something and took it to the next level, because the feeling that's going to be associated with that is just off the charts.
Right. So like I started, after I recognized it, the next night, I did it on purpose. I was like, I'm just going to imagine myself on that phone again, calling everyone I know, whether I know them well or not. I'm calling people I don't know. Hey, Oprah, guess what? Something wonderful is happening for me now. Yeah.
What a great idea. I love that. The telephone that can call anywhere. That's a beautiful invention. Seriously, what a great mental tool that you ought to write a blog piece about that. That is a really good idea.
Well, it really worked. I mean, it amped up the feeling, because I had the sense that all these people were celebrating with me. And so I'm thinking of Nasha there in the hospital. I'm like, get on that imaginary phone and call the angels.
Call anyone you can think of.
Any deities that you admire. Call your friends, call your family, call people that have passed on. Call everyone.
Absolutely, yeah. And follow up with that mantra. It's such a good one. Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening for me now. It really does produce some amazing results, and you don't necessarily know what they're going to be.
No.
Because like you said, you said that first week after we read that, you had forgotten to do it. I had actually remembered to do it that week, but after a few days beyond that week, I kind of wanted to expand it. So unlike the lady in the story who said that her list was so long, it was too much for her. It was a headache trying to go through it all. I was feeling inspired to have a list, so I literally made a list on my phone. And I listed each of the different things that I want to attract. And so now every night I am going through the same routine, but instead of saying, isn't it wonderful, something marvelous is happening for me now, I'm doing the Neville thing of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled and going to the first item and assuming that feeling and imagining it in my head, imagining that scene, and then I go to the next one and I imagine that scene, I go to the next one, I got like 10 items in the list. So it takes me a while to go through them all. But I've been doing it pretty faithfully for, another week? Has it been another week? I guess that's what it is. So during that time period, incredible things have been happening. And I have detailed some of them on episodes earlier to this in the past week. But a big portion of it was my mom, of course, passed this past summer. And the good side of that is she left us a legacy. My brother, my sister, and I are inheriting some money out of it, and it was quite frankly much more than I expected we were going to inherit, because when we bought, our listeners may know that we helped buy a house for my mom so that my sister could take care of her the last year of her life. And I thought we had liquidated all of her assets in order to do that. But it turned out one of her annuities stayed intact, and I didn't know that. So in that sense, it was a bit of a surprise for me. And it's a good size amount of money for the three of us. But to make it even more exciting, and I don't want to go into all the details of it, but very briefly, here in the U.S., you can have different kinds of annuities that are dependent on whether or not they are tax deductible. And there's a whole thing that's associated with that. Americans will be aware of IRAs and so forth. Well, that kind of thing ties into it. So the question was, the money that we're inheriting, is it tax deductible? And we received conflicting information. The annuity company on the one hand said, yes, it is. And on the other hand said, no, it isn't. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense. So I followed up, and come to find out they had made a mistake and had been deducting money they shouldn't have been deducting. So the legacy that we got just increased by about 25%, which was like, whoa, this is like cherry on top of the whipped cream.
Right.
So just when I thought I manifested some really cool money, it got even better.
You know what I think about when I hear things like this? I was telling you off air that I remembered a time when I got a check from my homeowner's insurance company that said, it's basically, oh, sorry, for the last 20 years, we've taken out too much every month.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And, a little bit every month for 20 years. It was a pretty good sized check.
It adds up.
And I was like, what hit me when that happened was how often we are intending for some kind of magic to happen, right? Some kind of blessing to come our way. And we've already decided that there's only a few ways it can happen. I could get a bonus at work, or, right? We've got like a handful of things that could happen. Mm-hmm. And there's always that thing that comes where we had no idea, like you had no idea this was going to happen. First of all, you didn't think the annuity was even there. And then it turns out to be more than you thought because of the tax thing. And it's like, that was the same with that. It's like, in a million years, I wouldn't have thought that was going to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's so many ways that the universe can work things out that we're not aware of. And that always gives me that expansion of possibility in my mind. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to limit myself by thinking this has to happen a certain way.
And that's another key point of the story that I haven't relayed so far, because that story of the annuity. Now, this was mom's money. This is money that should have been coming to her on a monthly basis and wasn't. And there's a very interesting part of that. I mentioned how we had bought a home so that my sister could take care of my mom the last year of her life. Well, the last 4 or 5 years of her life, which was the time that this annuity was coming in, she was pretty miserable, to be perfectly honest. She was not happy with being alive, I think. I've mentioned before, I think she was pretty much done. Right. And nothing was good enough for her. She couldn't find the joy in anything, which I felt really sorry for her. And I really kept hoping to help reinforce her, and my sister was trying to do the best she could as her caregiver and all that. But she just wasn't in a good place. And I think to myself, how interesting it is. There was that money ready to come to her, but because she was in a bad place, she couldn't let it in.
Oh, wow.
What a lesson that is. Wow. Because the moment because when she died, of course, when you pass, all your resistances go away, because your resistances are basically in your body, so that just kind of disappears. Right. So now she's in a great place. Can't really do much with the money anymore, but, so now the money can flow in. Well, my brother, sister, and I, we didn't have those resistances in place. So now all of a sudden the money's starting to come in.
That's so true. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine about this. A certain situation, there was something, she didn't really want to deal with it, and she had tried to shop it out to somebody, and she had found someone to do it, and they said, great, I'll do it. And then something happened in their life, and they couldn't do it, and it's something that really needed to be done. And she was talking to me, and I kind of coached her and kind of joked with her that, you probably could have had it done already. All the time you've spent like avoiding it, right? Procrastinating, complaining about it. She said to me, do you have to be so direct? And I said, no, I just know this from personal experience, right? That sometimes I say, I've been complaining about this half-hour job for 3 hours. I can't have it done by now. Well, so I checked on her just before the podcast and said, because once we talked about it, she said, okay, you're right. I'm making a big deal out of this. I'm just going to go do it. I'm just going to get it done. So I said, how's it going over there? She said, you wouldn't believe it. As soon as I said, okay, I'll get it done, the person that had agreed to do it popped up and said, okay, ready to go.
Wow.
And I said, isn't it amazing when we stop resisting?
Yeah.
I mean, I love those kind of stories because they happen all the time. That non-resistance. Non-resistance.
Nasha made an interesting comment. So she's made quite a few of them about the stories we've been telling here. She says, Walt, the way you were talking about your mother, what do you think can give a human hope to live and not being done? And the answer is the human being has to make that decision themselves. We were trying to help her. My sister, my brother, and I, we were all trying to hold ourselves in that and hold our image of her in our minds in that high place. But she was not in a place where she was willing to receive it. So it literally is a choice. You have to make the choice.
Right.
So even if you're in pain, and I know right now, Nasha, you're in pain. You're in pain in the hospital. That's not a very nice place to be. It's a very unpleasant place to be. But you still have a choice how you're going to respond to it. You get to decide from moment to moment, am I going to be miserable or am I going to find some way to feel good even in the midst of this pain?
And this may be a point that some people don't like to hear, but I was recording the audio portion for my moon treat this morning, and this was in there, and so that's why it's top of mind. But sometimes we have to surrender to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's surrendering or acquiescing to the pain, to the struggle, to the plunge into the underworld, so to speak. Sometimes we have to say, okay, all right, you know what? I accept it. If this is what it is, this is what it is. And sometimes it's that little bit of non-resistance that causes everything to shift. Just like my friend yesterday, which was facing a task she did not want to do.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want to do it. And she said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Poof, everything shifted. So sometimes it's saying yes almost to that thing we don't want.
Well, it makes sense, really, because when you actively accept it, when you basically embrace this thing that you don't like, for that moment, you finally stop perseverating about it. You finally stop getting all upset about it. You just say, okay, here's the discomfort. There it is. I accept that there's discomfort there. And now you don't have to worry about it anymore. You're letting go of the worry. You're letting go of the fretting. And that's why the resistance goes away.
And sometimes it's like amazing how fast everything starts to shift as soon as you do that. So
I remember telling the story, I think I told it to you actually on the podcast about healing my legs, healing my ligaments.
Yes.
And it was on a day particularly where I was in pretty severe distress. I couldn't walk. I had to lie down. I could not walk. And I just decided, you know what? I'm a conscious creator. I do a podcast on this. By God, I should be able to do this.
Right? Yes.
So, I just put my mind to it, and my body kept saying, no, pain, pain, pain. And I said, no, I'm not going to feel the pain. Well, finally, I basically just did what you said. I said, okay, the pain is there. There it is. Got it. Done. Move on. Next. And at the moment that I did that, I was able to focus on what I was trying to imagine, which was not feeling pain, feeling as if my legs felt normal. And I got there.
Yeah.
I only got there for a split second, and then the next time I tried, I got it for a little bit more and a little bit more, but I got there.
Yeah.
And then I just kept after it and after it. And today, along these same lines, I was outside with my wife. She was outside reading a book because the weather's gorgeous here. And I went outside, was chatting with her, and I got down into a squat position to take care of my cat, to give him some pets and so forth, and commented to her, look at me, I'm squatting. I couldn't have done that a year and a half ago. That would have been literally impossible. Yeah.
I remember you were not riding your bike because I
wasn't able to do anything.
The bending knees, right. Wow.
And now I can actually be in a squat position with no pain at all. Like, whoa, I love it.
I have to say that that's one of the things that I do when I'm having some kind of chronic pain. Mm-hmm. Like I type, write, paint, and draw, and knit and crochet. So that's a lot of work on my hands.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, this past week included, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, my arm is just saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what I recognized was, what are the odds that this pain in my arm, especially if I take care of it and stop typing for a week, right? Just give it care. What are the odds that it's never going to go away? Pretty slim. Like, that's not going to happen. Right? Because I think
Yep.
back on all the other times, you with your knees hurting, me with a migraine or having insomnia. What are the odds that it's going to be like this for the rest of my life? It's not.
Oh,
That's not going
sure.
to happen. As soon as I get there, it just started healing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to make that conscious that, you know what? As long as I'm focused on it and thinking, what if it doesn't go away? Well, then I'm creating better odds that it's not going to go away. So, part of it is that surrender to it. It is what it is. I'm just going to take care of it. So
Now, there's also another manifestation story that's just starting to happen today. That's part of these manifestation affirmations I've been doing, these imaginations. Because one of the things on our list is a new home.
yes.
And we realize that what we're asking for, yes, Abraham tells us that it's no bigger deal to manifest a castle than a button. But we mere mortals usually find castles to be more difficult. So we've been setting our goal really high. We set it for a more modest one. We thought that we could reach as like a stepping stone, and then we'd go for the bigger one after that. But at least it would get us out of an apartment and into a home of our own, which is a big deal.
Right.
And there was one home that we'd found that pretty much fit the bill. It was a little bit on the high side price-wise, but it was pretty good. But it was more than we could really afford. But it gave us encouragement because we felt like, okay, up until now, we didn't think we could afford anything. We found something that was fairly decent, that was pretty nice, that we could actually afford. So, or not quite afford, almost afford. But it felt like we were getting close to it.
Right.
And then that home went off the market. Now, there was another home in the same complex that was actually priced $20,000 more. And it was worse. It was a worse home for more. And that one went off the market. That one actually got sold at the higher price. And we said, well, okay, this is a strange market, but whatever. And then we forgot about it for a few months. Today, I looked at the realtor website, and another home in the same complex is for sale. Only this one is selling for $30,000 less than the lower priced home was before.
Oh, wow.
And the only thing I missed the first time around is the others had air conditioning. This one doesn't have air conditioning, which was something we're really looking for. But I'm thinking, I have been working on the house affirmation pretty devoutly now for about a week. And look what pops up all of a sudden.
Wow. And that's a huge amount.
It is, yeah. And by the way, I did some research. It turns out adding AC to a house is a lot less expensive than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I live in a house that's almost 100 years old, and I had the AC put in. And I'm thinking, as you're telling that story, I'm like, well, they can just put that in.
Yeah, it's not that difficult.
Right.
And when you do, you increase the value tremendously.
Correct.
So I mean, this is still very much. And actually, the way we'd been gaming this out was because of the way our finances right now. We knew that financially we would be in a good place to start looking at a home seriously as an actual buyer after the first of the year. And here comes this house before the first of the year. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, I know based on the price that the price point that the house is at, that probably isn't going to last real long. It's definitely low priced. And I'm thinking, well, is there any way that it can be done now? And I began thinking about our financial circumstances, and I realized it just depends on how I tell the story to the finance company. Because we actually have a lot of good things that are going to happen after the first of the year. If they understand what all those things are, maybe they can make an exception here.
It just depends on how you tell the story to yourself.
Exactly. That's ultimately what it comes down to. You're right. I mean, I'm framing it in terms of what I'm going to tell them. But you're right. What I'm really doing is telling myself.
Yeah.
And as I'm telling myself, I'm building up my own belief that something good's going to happen. Now, are we going to actually put a bid in on this house? I don't know. We haven't even seen it yet. We're going to go see it tomorrow morning. But to me, it's just cool how it's all starting to fall in place after doing these affirmations for a week.
Yeah, and I told you that story one time. I had a friend that has a master's degree in library science, and she was looking for a new place, an apartment, and she finds this little apartment for rent, a cottage for rent, and it's got a library and everything else she wanted.
Wow.
And when she saw it, she said, oh my goodness, can you imagine, this is perfect for me. And then she called about it. They said, we just rented it to someone else. And her response was, oh, I'm getting close.
Yes. Excellent response.
I always think about that. I'm like, that's what I want my response to be if I miss out on something, right, that I think I really want. It's like, oh, I'm getting close. It's getting close, because that's that, driftwood, right?
And there are plenty of stories of people who lost out on the house or whatever, and they ended up getting the house anyway, or they ended up getting the job anyway, or whatever.
Or they ended up getting something better.
Yeah, or better. Yeah.
Right? Something better. So
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, I mean,
Well,
her response was spot on. That was excellent. I like
this
that.
is exciting. This is
Yeah.
exciting.
We better actually get to the book.
We
We've been
better
doing
get
all
to
these
it.
great stories, but I
I
mean,
know. What would you like to do some announcements before we dive in?
let's do that. We're inviting everybody who's not yet a subscriber of the podcast to become one, and it's just so easy to do because we're literally on all of the major podcast platforms. So if you're using podcast software already, you can find us there. But if you're not, just go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net, and right at the top of the page, you will find instructions that you can just click, 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 and within about 3 or 4 clicks, you will be a subscriber. And by the way, also feel free to join our live stream crew. We have a small crew that tunes into our live stream because we actually record to YouTube while we're doing the recording. So you can actually see us while we're doing the recording, as they like to do. Nasha and Jeffrey are among those who listen to us on the live stream. And you can do that just by going to YouTube and searching for LOA Today podcast videos. We'll pop right up. Click the subscribe button, then click the little bell so you get notified every time that we're live. And now you will have every single possible way to hear the podcast. So please become a subscriber because we love it when we get new people added on. And people are joining, by the way. Our numbers are increasing, Cindie. I don't know if I told you that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we've said this before, but we do hold all of our subscribers and listeners, whether you're a subscriber or not, but we think about that subscriber group, and we hold you in a place where we see your success, right? So,
oh, yes.
Because
very much.
That's what we want. That's why we're doing this, is so that, people can tune in, people can be inspired and learn techniques so that they can have more success. And
plus we do it for ourselves too. Look at what benefits we're getting out of it. I mean, it's fabulous.
Of course. Yeah. And we often get, emails and messages from people telling us that they're having success and that they appreciate hearing what we're doing. And so that always feels great too. So give us a shout, if you're a subscriber or not. I mean, just reach out and say hello, because we love that.
It always just warms our hearts whenever that happens. First of all, when we just get a contact, but then when we hear about something great happening, it's just like, oh, wow, that feels so good.
I know. It's awesome. Well, we are making our way through Neville Goddard's book, The Law and the Promise. It's a book that is full of really fantastic stories, letters that Neville received when he was alive and lecturing, and people would come to his lectures and read his books, and they would try his methods and have success and write him a letter to tell him. This book is full of those, so it's been a real joy to read. This particular chapter 10, Neville starts out with a bunch of quotes, so we'll start with those. But the chapter title is Things Which Do Not Appear. It starts with a quote from the Christian Bible, the book of Hebrews 11:3, that says, "What is seen was made out of things which do not appear." Then he quotes Herbert Hoover, "Human history, with its forms of governments, its revolutions, its wars, and in fact the rise and fall of nations, could be written in terms of the rise and fall of ideas implanted in the minds of men." And then he quotes Douglas Fawcett, "The secret of imagining is the greatest of all problems to the solution of which the mystic aspires. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme delight lie in the far-off solution of this mystery."
Very nice.
And then he quotes the Christian Bible again from Romans, "To refuse to recognize the creative power of man's invisible, imaginal activity is too great to be argued with. Man, through his imaginal activity, literally," and the quote is, "calls into existence things that do not exist." And then one more quote from John 1:3, "By man's imaginal activity, all things are made, and without such activity was not anything made that was made." So he's making the case here, as he always does, that our imagination, our thoughts, our ideas are what actually produce the creations that we experience in the physical world. He says such causal activity could be defined as an imaginal assemblage of images, which occurring, some physical event invariably takes place. It is for us to assemble the images of happy outcome and then keep from interfering. The event must not be forced, but allowed to happen. If imagination is the only thing that acts or is in existing beings of men, as Blake believed, then quote, "We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's minds."
Jeez.
That sounds like some witchery there.
It certainly does, yes.
This grandmother is daily treading the winepress for her little granddaughter. She writes, "This is one of those things that make my family and friends say, we just don't understand it. Kim is 2.5 years old now. I took care of her for a month after she was born and did not see her again until a year ago, and then only for 2 weeks. However, during this past year, every day I have taken her on my lap in my imagination and cuddled her and talked to her." And when I read this, I think of when I first moved away, my kids were really small. So they did not see their grandparents for sometimes years at a stretch when they were really small like this. And I think about that. The grandmother continues, "In these imaginal acts, I go over all the wonderful things about Kim. God is growing through me. God is loving through me, etc. At first, I would get the response of a very young child. When I started, 'God is growing through me,' she would reply, 'Me.' Now, as I start, she completes the whole sentence. Another thing that has happened is, as the months have passed, as I take her in my imagination on my lap, she has grown constantly larger and heavier. Kim hasn't even seen a picture of me this past year. At the most, I could only be a name to her. Now, sometime each day, her family tells me she starts talking about me. To no one in particular, just talking. Sometimes it goes on for an hour, or she goes to the phone and pretends to call. In her monologue are such bits as, 'My Dee Dee loves me. My Dee Dee always comes to see me every day.'"
Wow.
Even though I know what I've been doing in my imagination, it has caused me too to wonder much.
What a great story.
Isn't that a great story? That's
I
really
love that.
amazing. And I think it's really funny that I told that story about my dream. And then in here it says the little child was going to the phone and pretending to call us.
That's great.
Neville
It reminds
says,
me of, it
go
reminds me
ahead.
of the story that we told last week. I'm trying to remember what the details were, but it was the person here in the U.S. who was trying to imagine herself in her daughter's living room in
Right.
London, and actually was seen by her daughter in London. Like, it was the same kind of feel.
Right. And I was relaying that story to my husband. I said the part that cracked me up was that they both freaked out when they saw each other. It was like,
Right. I don't think Kim would freak out. She would just say, "Well, of course it's Dee Dee."
right. And that's interesting too, because it's a little child.
Yes.
And often the things that would freak out an adult don't freak out a little child.
Which makes sense. The more that we think about it, the more we talk about this stuff, we realize that kids are more close in terms of time to having been pure source energies. And they have, a lot of people have expressed, and I think it's probably true, that kids have a better memory of it than we do. And the memory fades over time. But because they have such a good memory, particularly at age, what, 2.5? Is that what they said?
Yeah, 2.5,
she's
right.
going to have a really good connection to that. So it's going to seem normal to her.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting.
One of the things that stands out to me about this story is that the grandmother is doing this every day.
Yes. Very key.
It's become a habit.
Yes.
And now, after some time, the family says now the little girl is doing it every day. So, sometimes it's that momentum aspect of any kind of imaginal work is doing it in a consistent manner to build that momentum and to have the power that's behind it.
In fact, that's why I try. I mean, I talked about how I do the imaginal things that on my list that I've been doing every night in Neville style. But I also do them during the day periodically. I mean, not at a given time, but if I have a slow point or whatever, and I remember, oh yeah, I've got those on my phone, I'll either actually get the phone out and go through them, or maybe I'll just do one or two of them in my mind. I took my nature walk today, and on my nature walk, about halfway through the walk, I was really enjoying how beautiful it is with the colored leaves and so forth, feeling good. And I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to focus on one of those imaginals right now. And I did, and I started imagining it. So you don't have to even limit yourself to once a day. You can do it more than once. You can do it as many times as you can remember to do it.
Right. Like as often as I find it really useful to have things in my schedule, right? Like something you do first thing in the morning, or something you do, I don't know, if it's a thought experiment or meditation or whatever process, anytime you're doing a certain chore.
Mm-hmm.
If you walk the dog every day, if you do dishes every day, whatever it is, if you can do it then. Just like we used to talk about if you're doing mirror work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody's in the mirror for at least brushing teeth time, do it then, like stack
Right.
it on top of another habit. But I also do the same thing, is that I not only have certain times like falling asleep or whatever, but if it comes to mind, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
It only takes a second, especially once your brain is accustomed to doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
In fact, when you said the thing about brushing your teeth and using that time to also do some sort of imagining, it reminded me of that scene from The Secret. The guy who's dressing himself in front of the mirror, you can't actually see his tie, but you can see him imagining adjusting his tie because he's going to be going out dressed to do his business work,
Right.
And then the next scene, he's some sort of successful person driving this big fancy car and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Same
so
concept.
Habits, important.
Yeah.
Okay, so Neville goes on to say, all imaginative men and women are forever casting forth enchantments, and all passive men and women who have no powerful imaginative lives are continually passing under the spell of their power. That's very interesting, especially when you think of it in light of the story we just read.
Right.
The grandmother was casting forth an enchantment, and the little 2-year-old who was more passive was coming under the spell, so to speak. Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There is no form in nature which is not produced by and sustained by some imaginal activity. Therefore, any change in the imaginal activity must result in a corresponding change in form. To imagine a substitute image for unwanted or defective content is to create it. If only we persist in our ideal imaginal activity and do not let lesser satisfactions suffice, ours shall be the victory. So here again with the consistency.
That last bit there, I like that phrasing. Do not let the lesser satisfactions suffice. To me, that is the equivalent of, instead of doing unimaginable right now, I'm just going to go check Facebook. Or I'm just going to watch some TV. Or, I'm just going to do something like that. And it's a reminder that, those are great opportunities. Those are times to do imaginal activity.
Well, and the way I read that sentence about letting lesser satisfactions suffice also is that when we are being intentional about creating something and we're imagining it and we get something that's not quite it,
right,
we settle for it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's another way that we just let the lesser satisfaction suffice. Oh, well, this is good enough, right? Instead of continuing on in whatever it is we're imagining. So this is in quotes, so this must be another letter. When I read in Seed Time and Harvest the story of the school teacher who, through her imagination in daily revision, transformed a delinquent pupil into a lovely girl, I decided to do something about a young boy in my husband's school. To tell all the problems involved would take pages, for my husband has never had such a difficult child, nor such a trying parent situation. The lad was too young to be expelled, yet the teachers refused to have him in their classes. To make matters worse, the mother and grandmother literally camped on the school grounds, making trouble for everyone.
Wow.
I wanted to help the boy, but I also wanted to help my husband. So nightly, I constructed 2 scenes in my imagination. 1, I saw a perfectly normal, happy child. 2, I heard my husband say, I can't believe it, dear, but do you know R is acting like a normal boy now, and it's heaven not having those 2 women around. After 2 months of persisting in my imaginal play night after night, my husband came home and said, it's like heaven around school. Not exactly the same words, but close enough for me. The grandmother had become involved in something that took her out of town, and the mother had to accompany her. At the same time, a new teacher had welcomed the challenge of R, and he was progressing wonderfully, well into all I imagined for him.
Hooray.
That's a really cool story.
It is a cool story. I've actually experienced a version of that story, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I've told you.
Tell it?
Well, I told you how, I think I've told all of our listeners about how I helped to found what is known as a Sudbury School. It's an alternative form of
Right.
schooling where the kids are in charge of their day. And when we founded our school in New Britain, Connecticut, one of the original founding kids, the first year kids of the first year of the school, was a girl who was very troubled. She was in the foster care system. She was on various medications. She was angry at the world. She was angry at her father, who was basically non-existent in her life. Her mother was doing the best she could, but she had her own issues. I mean, this was a very angry kid. She was about 12 years old at the time. And I was determined to get her into the school because I knew it would help her. And I was also determined to help her learn how to be who she wanted to be. I was determined to help her feel like she really did have the freedom to grow into the person she wanted to be. And I can't say that I did deliberate imaginals because I didn't know what those were. I'd never heard of that. But I think I kind of did the equivalent of it because every time I talked with her or talked about her, it was always with the belief that, this is a girl who does need help, but so much good, she could turn into something really cool. And I won't go into the whole story, but I will tell you, after the school was open, to my sadness, I had to actually move out of the area. Louise and I had to move to Virginia because we were helping my parents at that point move into a senior center, and then we actually stayed. But she kept growing in the school, kept doing better and better. And long story short, she ended up becoming the school president.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
And she's currently in her late 20s. She's a marvelous young woman, just completely different from that angry 12-year-old. So there's another example of I held her in a high place in my mind. I
Yes,
talked about her that way. And I guess on some level she was ready to receive it because, boy, she ran with it. She just
that's
absolutely
so
ran with it.
great. And you say you didn't really know about doing imaginals, but this is what this is what I do as a coach, and I think most good coaches do, right? Is we hold our clients in the space.
Mm-hmm.
We see them accomplishing what it is they want to accomplish. And we see that for them when they don't see it.
Yes,
And I think that makes all the difference.
I think
So
so.
that's I love that story. And
Yeah.
that story here that we just read, that she imagined him progressing wonderfully, and he did. Um, this
Now,
next,
I also want to contrast it because I told the story earlier about how my brother and my sister and I tried to do the same thing for my mom, but it wasn't working out. Why? Because my mom was not in a space to receive it. And therein lies the biggest difference from my perspective. My young 12-year-old friend, she was in a space where she was ready for something. She didn't like her life. She was pretty unhappy, but she
right?
was ready to make a change. My mom was not in a space to be able
Well,
to make a change, to even consider it.
right. So your mom was finished.
She was finished, and therefore she was so resistant she couldn't let our help in, whereas the young girl could let our help in. And the same thing happened in this story here. She doesn't give you any details about the boy or about the teachers or about the grandmother or the mother other than here's what happened to them, but it's pretty evident they were on some level ready to receive that help that she was putting out there
Right.
mentally.
Yeah. Well, I've told the story before about when I worked for the naturopath, and we had the two sisters bring in their mother to us. And
Right.
everything going on with the mother, we have treated successfully so many times with other people. And we look at the charts like, oh, this is easy peasy. Like, we know what to do for this. And nothing worked.
Yeah.
Nothing worked. And I was so confused about it. And the doctor that I was working under said to me, I said, what is going on? And she said, well, here's what I think. She didn't ask to be here. She didn't want to be here. The sisters brought her. They're the ones that want to see her get better. And she's done. And she said, when you give up the will to live, there's really very little that can be done for you.
Right.
However easily it seems those ailments would be cured, if you don't have the will to live anymore. And she was a very, very elderly woman. Her husband had passed. Like, she was just ready. And so when I hear that things like that, I think that's that choice that we get to make. We don't always like it, right? I mean, a friend of mine was saying recently that it's one of the things we do when someone we love is dying. We make resistance for them
Yes.
because our feeling is, don't go, don't go. We don't want you to go. We want you to stay. And so, even if they are ready, sometimes there's all this resistance everywhere about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, so these younger people that were in so much pain, obviously this boy and the young woman that you know, um, they weren't ready to go. They were ready to
No.
have a shift, right?
Yes.
And so, so we see that shift. Now this
Exactly.
next sentence that is in the chapter right after this story, Neville says, "It is useless to hold standards that we do not apply. Unlike Portia, who said, I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than be one of the 20 to follow my own teaching," from The Merchant of Venice. He says, GB followed her own teaching. It's fatally easy to make the acceptance of the imaginal faith a substitute for living by it. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. And I just want to point out this sentence about it's useless to hold standards that we do not apply. It might be in a different context than it is here, or maybe not, but it's something that is funny to read that sentence because I've been talking about this all week to clients.
Oh, no kidding.
And one of the things that I expect my clients to have high standards. And it's funny how often we tolerate things, right? So I use this example, and I use it because I can say this, I can raise my hand and say, this is me, right? I can say, yeah, I know this bit. And it is that, like, I can walk into someone else's house and notice how dusty it is and think, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my house is probably dustier, right? And I just don't see it. Okay. So there's a gap there.
Yes.
Right. And we do this all the time with certain things. And when we can close that gap between what we say our standards are and what we're actually living, then we'll start to see a great deal of power in our manifesting. And so when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, I've been talking about that all week, about having high standards. Right?
Yeah.
So just a
I love that
tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll even pile onto that one and take it in a different direction. What all of these stories remind me of, because we've been really emphasizing how important it is for the recipient of the help to receive it.
Right.
And to be in a space to receive it. If you're in a place, and I've been in that place very recently, I know you have at times, if you're in a place where you're just not feeling good, you're not feeling confident, it's not there, you're feeling down, depressed, angry, frustrated, revengeful, whatever, you're just not in a good place. And you are not willing to do whatever you can to be willing to receive, to try to receive anything that might be coming your way from somebody else that you don't even know they're doing it. If you're not willing to open up to it, you're not going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
So when we're in that place where we're just feeling miserable, maybe we're in pain like Nasha in the hospital, maybe we're that kid who's, just feeling miserable at school. It doesn't matter what the situation is. If we are not willing to at least consider the idea that someone out there is trying to help us imaginally, then we can't receive the help. We can't. It's just not
I really
possible.
love that idea of just, sometimes we've talked about this before. Many of you maybe that listen know about tapping. It used to be so obscure, and now everyone's doing it, right? But you use your hands to tap on different points of your body, on your hand, on your head, on your collarbone. And while you're doing this, you're saying, healing affirmations or different things. And it's a very powerful technique that works for many, many people. And the thing that I've noticed is that I can tap for someone else and it has great results. I can tap for myself and get great results. But when I'm down in that place where I'm having pain, or I'm just like you're talking about, just feeling low, feeling under the weather, whatever, it's very hard for me to tap for myself. I don't know why. Like, I know if I do it, it'll help. And I just can't bring myself to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
But what I really like is the idea of recognizing that there are people out there in the world that may or may not even know me that are sending healing out to people like me, and that I can be open to receive that. That's a really cool thought. And I know it because I do it. Like, I practice certain forms of Buddhist meditation, Tonglen, Bodhisattva meditation, where what I'm doing is sending healing to other people, and I may not know them, right? And so there are plenty of people doing that. and I can actually make the conscious choice to open up to receive it.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, whatever blessing I need, whatever healing I need. That's fantastic. I'm so glad you talked about this, because that's really cool.
It
to
is
think
cool.
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Linda Armstrong, who does the Friday podcast with me, likes to point out that no energy that you put out there goes to waste.
Right.
Like, let's say you put out a thought. I put out thought forms for my mom. Well, she didn't receive them, but did they go to waste? Absolutely not. Somebody else benefited from them. I don't necessarily know who they were, but somebody else benefited from them.
Yeah, and they could come also back to you.
Absolutely, they can.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to know where it's coming from. It's not important to know.
That's
all
really
you have to
cool.
know. All you have to know is that it's out there, ready for you to receive it.
Yeah, that's really cool. In all my years of sending out, right? I don't think there's been a time when I've needed something where I've actually recognized other people are sending it out, and I can just open to receive it.
Because some of us, and I'm sure you're in that same boat with me, we tend to become givers. We forget to be receivers.
Yeah.
It's really important to be a receiver.
Right.
It's really,
right.
really important.
Flex those receiving muscles, people. Yes, we have to be willing and open to receive. Absolutely.
And like you say, it's especially hard to do it when you're in pain, when you're depressed, when you're in a bad place. But that's when it's the best time to practice it too.
Well, and just here's the thing that I like to think about: just be willing.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same advice that I may give to someone who's having a really hard time forgiving someone, right? Is that if you can't say I forgive someone, say I'm willing to, or let me be willing. You know, it's just, I want to be willing. How about that? I desire to be willing to forgive, you know, baby steps incrementally, because you're moving yourself towards that place. And so being willing to receive,
yes.
Which is really hard for some people.
Oh, it's hard for a lot of us.
So hard. You know,
it's a
think
skill
about the
that has to be
times that
learned.
people go to lunch and someone offers to pick up the tab and people are like, no.
Yes.
It's like, instead of just saying, oh, thank you so much.
Right.
Like, it's hard for us sometimes to just receive and say thank you.
But it's
even
such a good
compliments,
skill.
right? Oh, what a lovely sweater. Oh, this old thing.
No, this little thing, yeah.
Right? I mean, really. And so once you recognize that when you're doing that, when someone offers to pick up the tab and you don't let them, like money's coming your way and you're saying no.
Right.
And compliments might be coming your way and you're saying no. And oh gosh, that's really when you have that realization that you're pushing away good things that are showing up.
I've been getting that in a more ethereal way lately on my nature walks. It's ridiculous how many people I'm getting passing me when I'm not doing anything in particular who are giving me a big smile and a hello.
Yeah.
I mean, every single one of them. And I know it's because of what I'm putting out, but I'm not even aware of it anymore. And like, oh, wow, that's so cool. And I have to remember to appreciate that. Like, thank you. That's really great.
Yeah, no, it is so cool, because when you think about it, think about it in a really practical sense. If you've got a few people in your life, or maybe you work on a team, and there's one person that no matter what the boss asks, they always say yes. And then there's other people that have stuff going on, or they may say, no, I can't do that, or whatever. Well, pretty soon, the boss just doesn't ask anybody but that one person.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
So think about the opposite of that, is if every time a blessing comes your way, you say no.
Yes, which I've done.
Pretty soon they kind of stop coming. And I actually have a real life, experience of that happening to me, is that for years and years, I always deferred to everyone else. Right? Hey, Cindie, what do you want to eat for dinner? Where do you want to go for lunch? Oh, I don't care. Where do you want to go? What movie do you want to watch? I don't care. Let's watch what you want to watch. That was always my answer. And, it started because I think I did have a desire to be a people pleaser, right? I was a real people pleaser, but also because I didn't think that was a bad thing. It was like, I'm laid back, I'm easygoing, everybody's happy around me because they get their way, right? I mean, there was some part of me that was wanting to be appreciated. And so I just deferred to everybody. And then one day, someone called me and told me that they had made all these plans without even asking me about it. And and I really felt upset about it. And yet the plans were something I totally would have said yes to. And I realized I deferred to other people so much that they didn't even ask me anymore.
Wow.
No one said, what movie do you want to see? No one said, where do you want to go? The people I hung out with, they didn't even ask me. They just called and said, hey, we're all going to do this. Because why? Well, because I never had an opinion. And so that's what will happen when you continually push something away, is pretty soon it stops showing up. So
it happens in a lot of different ways, actually, because, and I can think of a few examples of it, but overall what it adds up to is if you aren't accepting compliments, if you're not accepting money that comes your way, because I'll pick up the check, if you're not accepting all this stuff, among other things, what you're doing is not only telling everybody else to stay away, you're telling yourself to stay away. And it shows up in very unpleasant ways. But when you reverse that,
right.
When you reverse that, all of a sudden, the whole pattern shifts. The whole pattern changes. So literally, I mean, the way I think about it is like this. Especially as we get older, it becomes easier and easier to give up on our dreams. Especially if we've had like long periods of time, and I certainly had a very long period of time where nothing was coming true for me. Nothing was working. Nothing was working out. Everything went against me. If there was 50-50 chance and one way was going to be great, the other way was going to be bad, the bad was going to happen. I mean, it was like that for literally years. And I didn't understand why it was happening. Finally, I learned, like, oh my God, I've been attracting all that and I didn't know it. But even then, it was still hard to turn that around because I had such a habit going. So, wow, I mean, if you don't accept good stuff that's coming your way, you can actually set yourself up for a really bad pattern.
And then what happens is you start telling this story, and I've known people that told this story, and the story is nothing ever works out for me.
Yes, oh God.
Right? And so, and then the more you tell that story, the more things don't work out.
Absolutely.
Because you're telling your subconscious, hey, just letting you know, nothing works out for me. And the subconscious goes, okay, we can handle that.
Yeah, right.
And then pretty soon you realize that nothing is ever working out, which solidifies your belief, because you're always going to prove your beliefs. You're going to prove them out. That's why it's so important that we have high standards.
I agree. And one of those high standards, I think, has to be to keep choosing life, to keep choosing desires, to keep choosing, I'm going to attract something new, and just keep staying on that wavelength, because that's the happy wavelength. Even if it doesn't feel happy at first, that's where you're trying to get to. That's where you want to keep moving yourself toward. That's what the affirmations are for. That's what the imaginations are for. That's what they're all for, to get you to that place, because that's where life happens.
Well, and you just said something that reminds me, it's in line with your Sudbury School.
Mm-hmm.
It's in line with a lot of, thoughts I have about how to shift things. And that is, you said, I want to try something new. I'm willing to try something new.
Yes.
Right. And that's curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes I give advice to clients to follow their curiosity. What are you curious about right now? Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's the most trivial thing you can think of, or if it seems something like I want to solve, the problem of world peace or famine or cancer or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's little or big, button or castle, but what are you curious about right now? What are you curious about? Tap into that. Yes. And let that curiosity lead you. It will lead you to that new thing, and it will breathe some life into, what's going on. And
I agree completely.
What is
that
the
curiosity, that curiosity is huge. It's gigantic. It literally drives everything. You see it best. You mentioned the Sudbury School. You see that really big in the kids in the Sudbury School.
Right.
From the day that you open the door, you just kind of watch the kids, because none of them had been to a Sudbury School either. This was new for them. They'd been to traditional schools, So they're feeling their way and they're testing the boundaries and all that. And you can literally see them learning it. You can literally see them trying things out through their curiosity. They explore this, they explore that. And it can actually drive the parents crazy, because a kid will try something for 10 minutes and he'll say, nope, that's not what I want to do. And he'll go to the next thing and try that one for 5 minutes. Nope, that's not. And he'll just be jumping from one thing to the next. And the parents saying, when's he going to settle on something? And the answer is when he finds the thing that's really exciting his curiosity. That's when it's going to happen.
That's right. So it's good advice for all of us.
Absolutely, it really is. So,
not just for the school kids, but for us adults as well.
so Neville really inspired some pretty good discussion today, I would have to say.
So, yeah.
In chapter 10, my goodness, it's very, very cool. Before we go, tell people how people can reach out to Cindie Chavez, the life coach, who obviously gives pretty damn good advice, I must say.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's not all advice. I have the the way of digging out your own wisdom from you, because I know you have all the answers. And so I have the skills and the tools to help you find your own answers. And they feel much more authentic when they're coming from you, right?
I love it.
So you can find me at cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ. I would love to have you give me a shout, and I'd love to be your coach if you need a coach or desire a coach at this time. But say hello. I would love to hear from you.
Excellent. So thank you once again for leading us through Neville. Thank you, live streamers. And Nasha, we wish you a happy recovery as soon as possible. We're going to be looking forward for the day when you say, hey, I'm out of the hospital and life is improving, because that's when we'll know you're doing your imaginals.
Yes, we're watching you be successful there.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, Cindie, we hold everybody in that high space of, wow, we look forward to, that next great thing that we're going to hear about, because it's going to be so cool.
Exactly.
So thank you, guys. Thank you especially to our podcast listeners as well. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.